Hey everybody, welcome to week 5 of our discussion boards. So for this week, I started out looking at medieval monks and then ended up taking a total rabbit hole trip down into medieval style like crime and punishment, which was really fascinating. So what I discovered, I went through a couple different areas. We've got Helen Carroll's The Ideology of Punishment in the Late Medieval English Towns, theft and robbery in the sentences of Moldovia's criminal department, mayhem in the monastery, stricken by terror, seeing and knowing in late medieval criminal case records. All of this was really interesting because it painted a very fascinating picture of the type of criminal trials that were occurring, which were very much at the disposal and preference of the local kind of governing bodies. So rarely were the major, you didn't see a lot of royalty interrupting anything. You didn't see the Pope often brought in. You didn't see a lot of even the, upper level not royalty, but nobility coming in. It usually was left, the general public's criminal proceedings were usually left to the town mayor. And even then, they were generally encouraged to be a bit forgiving of the smaller level punishments or crimes. So for example, one of the things I found was if a person was regularly found gypping people on, sales or selling bad meat, they may be given a fine for the first one or two offenses, and then, it escalates from there. And it kind of follows a similar level of severity in terms of crime that we have now. So with, our current criminal processing, we have misdemeanors and felonies. They had something similar. They just didn't call it that. But rape and murder are going to be at the top of the, scale. And then those smaller petty crimes are generally handled by the main individuals of the town. Public humiliation was a huge part of it. So if you went for a trip to the pillory, oftentimes it was accompanied by music you were paraded around the town. And then, of course, the public's part in that was very big because not only were you humiliated for the time you were in the pillory, which may not even be that long, it was more of a social ramification because after you'd been in the pillory, everyone knew you had been there, everyone knew why, and generally that public humiliation, or at least that public distancing, continued to occur. So it could ruin businesses, it could ruin, relationships, all kinds of stuff. Even the monks, which is where I originally came into this kind of area, were not, again, they weren't exempt. There were a couple exemptions for nobility and your aristocrats, the Pope, obviously, some of those higher levels, but generally everyone was kind of expected to kind of toe the line. And so even the monks, I found a court case that he had been tortured into a confession, and then later he had someone kind of come to his defense saying, hey, we can't determine off of his confession because it was made under duress, and he was still punished. Or even that went down to an even more smaller level where I found another thing talking about where the monks, I believe that was in mayhem in the monastery, but the individual monk's leader, of the monastery, would be in charge of discipline. And there it was they did have physical discipline occurring, but it was looked down on and it was considered abusive. So really fascinating stuff going on with all of the medieval criminal proceedings. It was very loose. They had laws and they had expectations for their citizens, but it was sort of left up to the wronged at times. So if you went and punched the mayor, he could ask for your hand to be cut off, and that was an acceptable thing, but generally he was expected to kind of forgive it unless it was a true grievance. So really fascinating. I encourage you to look into it. I had a good time reading that. Have a great day. Bye.